Cliff and Sydney, a newly married couple, are on their honeymoon in Hawaii. They're enjoying their time, watching their wedding video and reliving those beautiful moments. Sydney even films Cliff as he drives their Jeep through the scenic routes. Their adventure continues with a romantic helicopter ride to another Hawaiian island, where the stunning views leave them completely in awe. They stop at a shop to pick up hiking gear, share a quick kiss, and get back on the road. While driving, they accidentally roll over a newspaper on the road. The headline reads, "Newlywed couple found dead in Honolulu." The report reveals that the killer removed the victim's teeth and fingerprints to prevent identification, and the murderer is still at large, somewhere in Hawaii. But Cliff and Sydney, unaware of the threat, remain focused on getting to Maui Beach for their hike. On their way, they come across a couple, Kale and Cleo, trying to hitch a ride. Cliff pulls over, but Sydney isn't comfortable with picking up strangers. She's clearly annoyed, but before she can protest, Kale and Cleo start loading their bags into the Jeep. Their names are printed on their luggage. Cleo hops in and casually asks if they're heading to Maui Beach. Sydney lies, saying they're only going a short distance. Cliff, who also doesn't like Kale's rough appearance and tattoos, agrees with her. Kale picks up on the lie. Cleo tries to break the tension by showing them wedding photos and mentions that they got married on Oahu, the same island where the Honolulu murders happened. Sydney begins to feel a connection with Cleo and agrees to give them a lift. Cleo is thrilled and hugs her, but Kale suddenly gets furious, yelling at Cleo to get out of the Jeep. Shocked, Cliff and Sydney quickly drive away. 10 miles later, they reach Maui Beach and put the strange encounter behind them, enjoying the moment by taking happy photos. They then head into the mountains for their hike. But soon, they stop. The trail is narrow, slippery, and dangerously close to a deep rocky gorge. At that moment, a man named Nick approaches from the trail. He confidently crosses the tricky section and encourages them to follow. Cliff gathers courage from Nick's calmness and makes it across. Sydney starts to follow but gets startled when a helicopter flies overhead, nearly falling off the edge. Cliff grabs her just in time, pulling her back to safety. Shaken, they thank Nick, who continues the hike with them. Along the way, Nick says Cliff looks familiar and asks if he works in television. Cliff says no. He's a screenwriter and his first script is being made into a film, but they've never met before. Further down the trail, they encounter 3 panicked girls. One of them briefly had phone signal and received a call from her dad, warning her about the newlywed murders. She says police believe the killers are a young couple. Now terrified, Cliff and Nick check their phones, but still no signal. Cliff wants to turn back, but Sydney reassures him, saying the murders happened in Honolulu on Oahu, and they're now on the island of Kauai. She insists they'll be fine. Later, they pause to decide their next stop. While Cliff and Sydney were planning to head to a beach, Nick says he's going to a secret waterfall. Sydney gets excited because she read about that exact waterfall in her guidebook. Nick invites them along, but Cliff hesitates, thinking it would be intruding. Just then, Cliff sees Kale and Cleo approaching again. Fearing them, he decides to stick with Nick and go to the waterfall. Sydney is pleased with the decision. After a short trek, they arrive at the secret spot. There, lying naked on a raft beneath the waterfall, is Gina, Nick's girlfriend. Cliff, feeling uneasy, climbs a hill to find a cell signal. There, he learns something terrifying. The killers have fled to Kauai, the very island they're on. Just then, Kale blocks Cliff's way. But before anything happens, Nick appears, smiling calmly. Seeing Nick, Kale backs off, telling Cliff they'll meet again at the beach. Back at the waterfall, Cliff urges Sydney to leave. Nick and Gina agree to come along. While packing up, Cliff realizes their beach permits are missing. Suspecting Kale and Cleo, he searches their bags but doesn't find the permits, only a pro-legend business card. He assumes Kale might be an ex-con. They head out. On the way, Nick reveals he once worked in special ops during the Iraq War. He shares how a landmine blast put a hole in his skull, and doctors implanted a titanium plate in his head. He jokingly says the plate helps him pass through metal detectors without suspicion, and because of that, security never notices his little friend, Gilligan. When Cliff and Sydney ask what he means, Nick pulls up his pants and reveals a hidden knife. Gina chimes in, proudly saying Nick is impossible to kill. The moment unsettles Cliff, but afraid, he continues with them. Later, Nick and Gina cross a river and get ahead. Cliff finds phone signal again and secretly shows Sydney a blurry police CCTV image of the murder suspects. To their shock, the faces resemble Nick and Gina. Sydney can't believe it, saying she spent time with Gina and never felt anything off. But Cliff is convinced Nick's wild stories were lies. As they prepare to leave, they suddenly notice Nick and Gina watching them. Tension rises, but they continue walking. Heavy rain forces them to set up camp. That night, someone is seen sneaking around the camp. Suddenly, Nick stands still, staring deep into the jungle as if he saw a ghost. The others nervously follow his gaze. Nick finally says he saw a herd of goats and begins preparing a bow and arrow to hunt. But Cliff doesn't believe him. He saw no goats. Nick hands Cliff an axe, urging him to help. Cliff hesitates, fearing Nick might kill him in the woods. Nick mocks Cliff for being scared, embarrassing him in front of the girls. Left with no choice, Cliff agrees to go along. Meanwhile, Sydney and Gina are sitting at the camp, chatting. Gina asks Sydney if she's ever been attracted to anyone other than Cliff. Sydney replies that she only wants to have children with Cliff and live a peaceful life. But Gina doesn't believe her. She says no one's life is perfect and everyone has a past. Then Sydney reveals a secret she's kept buried for years. Before Cliff, there was a man named Rocky. Everyone thought he was a decent guy, but Sydney became obsessed with his dark and risky lifestyle. One night, he took her on a date to a lake. As things turned passionate, Rocky suddenly turned on the car's headlights and asked Sydney to look at a pile of leaves nearby. When she did, she found a dead neighborhood dog. Rocky had strangled it himself. He then threatened to kill Sydney if she ever told anyone. Sydney, now emotional, says she never shared this with anyone until now. Back in the jungle, eventually, Cliff spots a couple camping near a fire. He quietly calls for Nick, but Nick doesn't hear and walks ahead. When Cliff checks the campsite, only a girl is there. Suddenly, a man appears behind him, and Cliff attacks him with an axe. But he quickly realizes the man is actually the shop worker from where they bought their hiking gear. The man had come to return the permit Cliff had left behind. Realizing his mistake, Cliff apologizes and returns to camp. Later, Nick returns with a goat he hunted. Gina and Nick brutally butcher the goat in front of Cliff and Sydney. Watching their behavior, Sydney becomes convinced that Nick and Gina are the real killers. Terrified, Cliff and Sydney go into their tent and begin planning their escape. Cliff explains they can't just run, as they're deep in the jungle and the beach is 2 miles away. They'll have to act friendly until they reach the beach to avoid raising suspicion. Sydney agrees and they both fall asleep. The next morning, Cliff hears a helicopter overhead and steps out of the tent. The police are searching for the killers. Soon, they arrest 2 suspects hiding in the jungle. It turns out to be Kale and Cleo. The police find tools and teeth from the murdered victims as evidence. Despite their pleas of innocence, Kale and Cleo are taken away. Seeing this, Cliff, Sydney, and Gina feel relieved. Then Gina reveals that she suspected Cliff and Sydney of being the killers. To that, Cliff and Sydney laugh and admit they thought Gina and Nick were the murderers. The 3 share a laugh. Now feeling safe, the 4 of them head to the beach with renewed excitement. They capture happy moments on camera and join other hikers in celebration. Later, Cliff approaches Nick and asks him to go see the sea caves. Cliff had borrowed 2 boats for the trip. Nick initially refuses, having other plans with Gina, but Cliff insists and Nick finally agrees. Before leaving, Nick tells Sydney to let Gina know they'll be back by evening. A few minutes later, Gina arrives. Sydney informs her about Nick and Cliff heading to the sea caves. Gina then starts recording them with her camera. While doing so, she notices a memory card inside. Curious, she checks it and finds wedding photos of the real Cliff and Sydney. At first, she smiles, but then her expression changes. Something in the photo shocks her. Realizing the horrible truth, she drops the camera and frantically shouts for Nick to come back, but he's too far away. With no network on her phone, Gina panics, grabs her axe, and rushes toward the sea caves using a different route. Sydney, seeing this, checks the camera herself, and now she knows Gina knows the truth. She also runs after her. The shocking twist? The Cliff and Sydney Nick and Gina had been traveling with weren't the real couple. They were imposters. Rocky was actually the man Sydney told Gina about, the crazy one. They had murdered the real honeymooners, Cliff and Sydney, removed their teeth and fingerprints, and assumed their identities. They learned everything from the couple's wedding video, including how they spoke and behaved. The blurry killer photo on the internet was none other than Rocky and his accomplice Sydney. Rocky was a meth addict, and the drug made him violent and psychotic. He would kill people whose identities he liked and live as them. Sydney, though in love with him, was just a tool for Rocky, and eventually, he got her addicted to the drug too. We also see a flashback of Nick and Gina in Honolulu the day the real murders happened. They missed the boat Rocky and Sydney took while escaping. Later, Kale and Cleo unknowingly got into a fight with Rocky and became scapegoats. Rocky planted evidence in their bag and told the shop worker to report them to the police. When the worker did, the police arrested Kale and Cleo. Rocky and Sydney were still on the loose and now had their eyes on Nick and Gina to become their next targets. Back in the present, Gina runs toward the sea caves, but Nick is already there with Rocky. Nick begins to notice Rocky's strange behavior and realizes something is off. Rocky suddenly breaks his glasses and pulls out a gun. Sensing danger, Nick grabs his knife, but before he can react, Rocky shoots him. Just then, Gina arrives and screams as she sees Nick bleeding. Rocky shoots at her, but she dodges and survives. Sydney appears with a knife and lunges at Gina. Gina drops her axe, which rolls down the hill into Nick's boat. A brutal fight breaks out between Gina and Sydney. Sydney knocks Gina down and tries to stab her, but Gina dodges, causing Sydney to fall into the water, though she manages to stab Gina's leg before falling. Gina pulls out the knife, searching for phone signal. She finally receives a telemarketing call and desperately begs for help, but the caller doesn't take her seriously. Meanwhile, Rocky suddenly grabs Gina, but she escapes. Rocky fires at her again, but she finds an opportunity and stabs him in the hand. Rocky, now furious, climbs the hill and tells Sydney that Gina contacted someone. They need to act fast. He tells Sydney to mislead the police at the beach while he chases Gina. Meanwhile, we learn Nick is still alive. The bullet had struck a metal plate in his skull, saving him. Now, full of rage, Nick picks up an axe and goes after Rocky. As Gina runs through the woods, some emergency medical personnel stop her, trying to treat her wound. She warns them about the killer, but they don't take her seriously. Rocky soon shows up, pretending to be Gina's friend, and claims she's a meth addict. But the medical team notices signs of meth use in Rocky, not Gina. Realizing the truth, Rocky shoots them all and chases after Gina again. Before he can shoot her, Nick jumps from above and stabs Rocky's hand. Though Nick is hit by a bullet, he keeps fighting. He disarms Rocky, takes his gun, and is about to kill him. Just then, Sydney arrives with the police in a helicopter and falsely accuses Nick of being the killer. The police aim their guns at Nick, preparing to shoot. Suddenly, Gina appears, kicks Rocky to the ground, and pulls Nick away. The police hesitate, and at that moment, Sydney's heart changes. Seeing Nick and Gina's true love, she realizes what Rocky never gave her. She confesses the truth to the police, that Rocky is the real killer and he'll strike again. Before Rocky can react, the police shoot him down. And just like that, evil comes to an end. In the final scene, Nick and Gina are airlifted to a hospital. On the way, Nick proposes to Gina. She says yes, and the two share a kiss. This is how this intense and thrilling movie comes to a close. So that's it. Hope you enjoy the story. Subscribe and press the bell icon for more videos.